Hello, and welcome back to the Timely Focus. I am Phil, and today we are taking a look at two phenomenal field watches, the Hamilton Khaki Field Auto and the Vaer Field White Automatic Watch. Both watches offer tremendous value, and if you are looking for a field watch in the sub-$1,000 price range, I believe these are two of the best options available. In this comparison, I am going to be scoring these watches head-to-head across what I believe are the most important aspects in the making of a great watch. Starting things off with the easiest empirical measurement is of course the power reserve. Now, neither of these watches have really anything special in terms of power reserve at 38 and 40 hours for the Hamilton and the Vaer respectively. That is pretty standard. Now, if you are wearing this watch every day, that is of course more than enough, right? It is worth noting that my Hamilton Khaki Field Auto is now 7 years old, and Hamilton has since replaced this ETA 2824-2 with an updated version that they call the H10, which is really just a reworked version of the original ETA 28-2. So, the new Hamiltons enjoy a much larger 80-hour power reserve, which is achieved largely by reducing the beat frequency from 4 Hz down to 3 Hz, and basically sacrificing a little bit of the smoothness in that second hand for extra efficiency. So both of these watches have adequate power reserves, but nothing really special, and they both get a 3 out of 10. Talking about the movement accuracy and quality more generally, both of these movements are tried and true. They both have hacking, hand winding, and similar accuracy ratings of -10 to +15 seconds per day for the Hamilton, and -5 to +15 seconds for the Vaer. These are some of the most popular movements on the planet and can be found in anything from $500 watches like these all the way up to multi-$1,000 watches as well. Thus, especially from a movement perspective, these watches are both great values. The main differences between the two movements are that the Hamilton's ETA is made in Switzerland, while the Vaer's Miyota is made in Japan. Another interesting point is that while the Hamilton's rotor winds in both directions, like most automatic watches, the Miyota's rotor spins in both directions but only actually winds in one. It can therefore be made to spin around quite quickly, which looks really cool, but there is a bit of a downside, right? In that you can actually hear it. If the room is very quiet, you can hear that movement spinning around. Visually, the Vaer has much higher quality finish work applied with really enjoyable Geneva striping visible on the back of the movement, while the Hamilton has a more nicely decorated rotor and a more three-dimensional layered look to it. This movement comparison was extremely hard for me. I spent many hours on it, and I went back and forth on which I thought was better, but ultimately they're both excellent entry-level movements that will do their job reliably for many decades. They get a 3 out of 10. For water resistance, both of these watches have the same 100 meters of water resistance. Now, before you were thinking this will be another tie, do not worry, this is not a tie. There's actually a very important difference between the two of these, namely that the Hamilton has a push-pull crown, whilst the Vaer has actually a screw-down crown. Now, for me, this makes a huge difference because the extra security that screw-down crown affords is massive. In my opinion, this is a huge difference and is extremely valuable. With push-pull crowns like that of the Hamilton, there is the risk that you might be doing something in the water and feeling confident that your watch will be totally fine because it has 100 meters of water resistance. But if you knock the crown, there is a possibility of bumping it out of place and getting a flooded watch. Funny enough, I have experienced the potential problems of a push-pull crown with my Hamilton. First time, I was swimming in the ocean for a couple hours. The second, I was simply rafting down the river and paddling a little bit with my hands. In both instances, after noticing small droplets of water, I popped the crown open and left my watch in rice for a few days until the water was gone. Rather impressively, my watch is still running totally fine, and I have not seen any real negative implications from this. However, those two events demolished my confidence in the water resistance of my Hamilton. So from now on, I treat it as though it is basically a dress watch with no water resistance. That is definitely a bummer considering it says it has 100 meters of water resistance, The Vaer having that screw-down crown and 100 meters of water resistance is a huge deal. Furthermore, Vaer actually pressure tests every single watch that they make, so you can have full confidence knowing that your watch will resist at least 100 meters of water pressure. I think this is really fitting too, because the Vaer was actually designed to look great in the office setting, but also be able to handle daily use out on the beach, surfing, and swimming. In the water resistance category, I am giving Vaer a 6 of 10 and the Hamilton a 4 out of 10. Next up, the bracelet, strap, and clasp. This is another category where Vaer beats the Hamilton. For less money, Vaer offers both a rubber strap and your choice of a bracelet, NATO, or Horween leather strap. The leather strap that comes with the Hamilton is quite nice and lasted me about 5 years of continuous use. I went everywhere with this watch for about 5 years straight, including inclement conditions like thunderstorms, swimming, and if I were a lot more careful, I have no doubt that my strap would have lasted much longer, but given the abuse I subjected it to, it lasted only about 5 years. Now, Hamilton does offer the Khaki Field Auto on a bracelet as well, but that bumps the price up on the Hamilton to $625. And to add the leather strap is another $100, making the equivalent package that comes from Vaer as standard cost $725 from Hamilton. That is $200 more than the Vaer, even before taking into account the 15 to 20% off promotions that Vaer has been running lately. Before I sound too biased to Vaer, I will point out that this bracelet does come with some pretty rough edges and relatively low tolerances, so I actually used a very fine file to clean it up around the clasp and some of the edges. I do really like how the Vaer's bracelet comes with links affixed with screws as opposed to the pin and collar system usually found on bracelets in this price range. It also has 4 micro adjust holes on the clasp, and swapping from bracelet to the straps is fairly convenient thanks to the quick release spring bars that also come standard from Vaer. Now, I say fairly convenient though, because I actually find it fairly finicky to switch when putting the bracelet on. You have to line it up just perfectly and then kind of push in those pins, and it is a finicky process. So for that, I will knock the Vaer a little bit, but it is undeniable the value that you get with those 2 strap options at a much lower price than the Hamilton. So I am giving the Hamilton a 3 out of 10 and the Vaer a 4 out of 10 for their strap, bracelet, and clasp. One thing relatively few people seem to think about, but is very important to me, is the originality of parts, service intervals, and the warranty. Sadly, to achieve these very competitive prices, a good portion of these watches' components, like the cases, hands, crystals, etc., are sourced from China. Vaer is at least open and honest about this, while Hamilton is, depending on how you look at it, somewhat deceptive. They write Swiss-made on the dial, but the definition of Swiss-made is fairly loose, given that only 65% of the item's value has to be of Swiss origin. Hamilton does not come out and say it, but word on the street is that most of the watch, besides the movement, is made in China and assembled in Switzerland. Vaer is actually really open about this, and they have long articles explaining the extreme difficulty of sourcing a watch in the sub-$1,000 or multi-$1,000 price range that does not rely on sourced parts. I really appreciate how Vaer is very open about this, and they are working quite hard to source as many parts as they possibly can from America, and are investing heavily into the American manufacturing and production. The recommended service intervals on both these movements is between 5 and 10 years, and both these watches come with 2-year warranties. So Vaer gets a 4 out of 10 and Hamilton gets a 3 out of 10. Probably one of the most important aspects of a watch is its dial and legibility. This, of course, moves us firmly into the cool factor group of characteristics, which is decidedly more opinion-based but still extremely important. Some would say the most important thing about a watch. Both of these watches have great dials that find their roots in the original field watches of the 1940s. The Vaer has a super clean and legible dial, further enhanced by its lack of a date window, which is probably much more true to the original field watches that it is inspired by. The Hamilton has finer, more intricate dial detail work, seen in the subtly grooved section into which the aerobic numerals are thickly painted. This gives the Hamilton's dial a much more refined and interesting appearance. Both watches are highly legible, but I will have to give the slight edge in this case to the Hamilton because of its clearly distinguishable minute and hour hands as compared to the Vaer's, whose hour and minute hands are pretty close in length, so as to require a split second longer to distinguish them. Hamilton gets a 5 out of 10, and Vaer gets a 4 out of 10. Lume is a category in which both of these watches suffer. The Vaer's retro-style lume certainly looks cool, but fades quite quickly, and the Hamilton's more modern lume simply is not painted on thickly enough. Both of these watches glow brightly enough for most of the night to tell the time, but there is a huge difference between the lume of these watches and that of a good dive watch. Vaer gets a 2 out of 10, and Hamilton gets a 3 out of 10 in the lume category. Both of these watches do well in the finishing department, especially considering their price points. Hamilton went for a fully polished bezel, adding a slightly more dressy look than the Vaer's nearly entirely brushed surface. Overall though, I do prefer the more complex curves and subtly polished bezel and lug edges of the Vaer. It just feels and looks a little bit more refined than the flat edges of the Hamilton. So Vaer gets a 5 out of 10, and Hamilton here gets a 4 out of 10. Movement feel is another differentiating factor. With the Hamilton, there is very little tactile feedback when winding the crown. It feels very mushy and is considerably less enjoyable than that of the Vaer's winding action, which is extremely crisp and gives the feeling of being connected to the movement. The Vaer also sounds a fair bit nicer when being wound. It has a more mechanical feel to it, which is absent in the Hamilton. However, neither possess that mechanically engaging yet super smooth winding feeling that is found in much higher end watches. So Vaer gets a 4 out of 10 and Hamilton a 3 out of 10. Historical significance is quite interesting, but rather dichotomous for these watches. Hamilton has been around since 1892, when it was founded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hamilton actually made field watches for soldiers back during World War II, and is one of the most successful American watch companies around. However, they are not strictly American anymore, given that they moved production over to Switzerland in the 1960s and later were bought by the Swatch Group. Vaer, on the other hand, is a new brand founded in 2016 in California by a couple guys who wanted high-quality, durable, historically inspired, and affordable watches that they could easily wear both surfing and to the office. Contrary to Hamilton, and most big watches for that matter, Ryan and Reagan at Vaer are actively investing in American assembly and manufacturing with the goal of one day making truly great yet affordable watches entirely made in America. I am a huge fan of that and really empathize with that story. Hamilton gets a 4 because of their great past, Vaer gets a 3 because of their inspiring startup story and the progress that they are making towards their ultimate horological goals, which I think are admirable. If Vaer continues with what they are saying they want to do, this score, of course, will continue to rise for them. Brand name cachet is not a strong point for either of these brands. Sadly, few people outside of the watch enthusiast community recognize either Hamilton, and even fewer recognize Vaer. So Hamilton gets a 4 and Vaer gets a 3. In terms of uniqueness, neither one of these watches are at all groundbreaking, but they are not supposed to be. They are both historically inspired field watches, and they both get 3s. Regarding rarity, though, there is a big spread. Lots of watch enthusiasts have Hamilton Khaki field autos, and rightly so, since they are great watches. But they are certainly not rare. Vaer, on the other hand, is much less well-known except to watch enthusiasts, and that is super cool. Hamilton gets a 2 and Vaer gets a 5. Financially, at least in the current market, neither of these watches will be making you money. Hamilton seemed to be trading for a few $100s, and Vaer is probably right there with them. However, there is just such a small volume of these trading that it is very difficult to actually make an accurate judgment on their second-hand value retention. These are watches that you buy to enjoy and keep, not to sell and make money on. Finally, the overall value category, possibly the most important category. I own both of these watches and enjoy them immensely. I think they are both great values. That is not just my opinion either. Ask any watch enthusiast what are some of the best values for money under $1,000, and I guarantee you the Hamilton Khaki Field Auto will be in their top picks for best value watches under $1,000. And I would argue that Vaer is actually right up there with them. In fact, I will propose that Vaer is overall a better value than the Hamilton. Take into account its slightly lower price point, yet similar workhorse movement, screw-down crown, and multiple strap offerings. I think the Vaer comes out ahead. So in overall value, the Vaer gets an 8 and Hamilton gets a 7. Again, both are great values, and it depends a little bit on what aspects you value most. But for me, the Vaer just edges out the Hamilton. This is further supported by the fact that Hamilton scored 54 points total, while Vaer scored 60 points. Again, some of these scores are fairly subjective, so if you disagree with the way I valued these watches, definitely let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear from you and see what you guys think. But those are my opinions. That is how I think the scores shake out for these watches. Personally, I think the Vaer is a little bit better of a field watch than the Hamilton, but you will not go wrong with either choice. Alright, I think that about wraps it up. I hope this was enjoyable, hope it was helpful. Please consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one. God bless you all.